welcome back to the channel. The focus will now shift back towards FPL after extensive Use Your Fantasy coverage over the weekend. This is currently my FPL Challenge team and I'll be locking it in alongside my FPL squad in the deadline stream on Saturday. I've got Alisson Becker in goal, Virgil van Dijk as my only defender, with Salah as my captain, Antoine Semenyo, who is the most transferred in player heading into Game Week 5, Chris Wood, and Jean-Philippe Mateta, who has 4 goals in 5 appearances against West Ham. I scored 78 points last week in FPL Challenge, and this week the challenge is going to be red versus blue. So any Liverpool or Everton players will score double the number of points, hence why I've gone for a triple up in Liverpool, despite having a relatively tough fixture with Everton being so impressive under David Moyes. You can join my FPL Challenge League by typing in the code HWWQV4. That can be found in the description. The same goes for my FPL League, and that code is WFF0U7. So in any of my videos for FPL, you will see those codes in the description and auto-join links to make it even easier. And for Use Your Fantasy, you can join my Champions League mini league there by also going to the description of all of those videos. The same goes for my Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Dylan RCM. You can also find me by typing FPL Dylan. There's my Discord server, the FPL League, Spotify, and also my Patreon and the championships by clicking the join button on YouTube. A lot of you signed up during the last couple of days and it's massively appreciated. The same goes to the super chatters, members, and subscribers. Let's keep on pushing towards new goals. We are very close already to 36,000 subscribers. Be sure to drop a like on this video, click that subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and Use Your Fantasy across the season. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. As usual, I'll provide a recap of the previous game week, which in this case was in Game Week 4, and it was a bit better than what we saw before the international break, which was my worst game week so far this season. But Robert Sanchez blanked in goal, conceding twice to Brentford in that 2-2 draw, and ultimately, that quote by Enzo Maresca heading into the Bayern Munich game on Wednesday is very concerning to say the least, because he said that Jorgensen will get games in the Premier League, Champions League, Carabao Cup, and the FA Cup, but ultimately, Robert Sanchez is the first-choice goalkeeper. He will play against Bayern Munich, according to Enzo Maresca, and this video is recorded before that Champions League fixture, and I did cover Use Your Fantasy in the best way possible heading into match day 1. As for my defensive line, this was the highlight of my entire week because every single one of them returned with clean sheets, and Gabriel managed to get 10 defensive actions with the last kick of the game, so that secured him an extra 2 points, and that also helped him get a bonus. So that was 9 points overall from Gabriel, who I bought a couple of weeks ago. He has been my best transfer so far this season, and Lacroix is someone I bought this week to replace Murillo, who ended up getting injured against Arsenal. He made 10 defensive actions within the first 30 minutes actually, and then he got injured. It was very unfortunate, of course, and we'll see if he's available for Game Weeks 5 and 6. But as discussed in my Transfer Tips podcast, I think Murillo is a hold in many situations. The reason why I sold him to Lacroix is not just to have a great chance of a clean sheet against Sunderland at home, but also to give me enough funds to make a really important midfield transfer and replace the injured Ismail Assar. I also had Ezri Konsa, who was maybe a bit fortunate to keep a clean sheet against Everton. The Toffees were the better team, but Konsa and Mings were 2 of the standout Aston Villa players in that match, and Emi Martinez made some big saves as well between the sticks, and Pedro Porro kept a clean sheet in a very standard performance for him as Tottenham Hotspur won comfortably away from home against West Ham, and they followed that up with a 1-0 victory against Villarreal courtesy of an own goal. Arsenal are another team, of course, that featured in the Champions League, and Gabriel also got 9 points in Use Your Fantasy courtesy of ball recoveries. I think he'll be better in that regard compared to the other Arsenal defenders, but it's a bit strange because in FPL terms, you could argue Saliba, once he's back and he could be available against Man City, we could see him get more defensive contribution points than Gabriel this season. But ultimately, in the long term, I think Gabriel is the safest Arsenal defender, and that's why I bought him a couple of weeks ago. In my midfield, I also went for 4 options here. Mohamed Salah was my captain, and that was a very fortuitous set of points there with that 95th minute penalty against Burnley. Ultimately, it was the right decision, and Liverpool did deserve the win, but I think the nature of it against the Burnley side that Liverpool were expected to beat quite comfortably, that was a bit shocking, but Salah got 9 points in the end as his base score, so 18 as my captain, and Cody Gakpo blanked, but I think he's stronger in home matches anyway. I don't really trust him as much in away matches, but he can still produce from time to time, and Reinders should have returned against Man United. He missed a big chance and had a few openings and occasions where he could have scored a goal or maybe got an assist. But I think Rangers will still get a few goal contributions throughout the season. But at the same price tag, and in fact for 0.1 million cheaper, you can buy Moises Caicedo, who is getting defensive actions in virtually every single game. And he's also getting a few goals now. So I think Caicedo is the pick of the bunch at 5.6 million. And Ndiaye got defensive contribution points in that goalless draw against Aston Villa. So I think Ndiaye is a very good option at 6.5 million. He was a doubt heading into that game, but I still had him in my predicted lineup, and ultimately starting him was very useful as Chris Wood was first on my bench, and the other options except Reynildo also blanked in my 15-man squad. As for my forward line though, Ollie Watkins has been an absolute disaster for me with yet another blank, and his price has dropped down to 8.8 million over the last couple of days, as you'll see in the price section. And Joao Pedro has had so much transfer activity. He got a lucky assist, you could say, for Cole Palmer, but he's always up there getting some goal contribution, and he's been very consistent for Chelsea throughout his career so far. I think there will be some dips in form, and he can be very frustrating as an FPL asset and a player, but he's still very young. His potential is extremely high, and Joao Pedro does have a lot of abilities to be a very good Premier League player in the years to come. Dubravka was on my bench and he did outscore Robert Sanchez, and he was so close to getting that clean sheet, and it could have been a 7 or 9 pointer for Martin Dubravka in the end. Chris Wood was subbed off before 60 minutes. I'm not too surprised by that because he had that long travel distance between New Zealand and the UK, but the likes of Kalimundo and Igor Jesus could pose a risk to his minutes in the long term. But against Burnley and Sunderland, I think Chris Wood will start, and he's worth keeping for such fixtures, and then you can sell him around Game Week 7. Reynildo kept another clean sheet. That's twice now this season where he has gotten a 6-pointer on my bench, but it's nothing really to kind of cry about or anything. It's good to have that squad depth when necessary, and ultimately, I started 4 defenders this week. They all return, so there aren't many complaints from me. I was never going to bench Ollie Watkins, for example, or Reinders for Reynildo Mandava, but that's something I could consider in future game weeks, considering the form of these players, especially in the case of Ollie Watkins. And my final player, of course, was Ismaila Sarr, who I bought heading into the Aston Villa fixture. He scored for me, racked up the highest XG of Game Week 3, but got that injury in the same match, and he's now going to miss the next couple of weeks. He could be available for that Liverpool fixture in a couple of weeks' time, but ultimately, he is a sell. And as I hinted in my reaction stream, I've already pulled the plug and made a transfer and bought in the most consistent player so far this season in the midfield, and that'll be talked about in the transfer section. But before I do that, let's discuss the prices. Robert Sanchez is still at 5 million, but that quote by Enzo Maresca could put a lot of doubt into him as a long-term asset, and maybe on the wild card we should consider other options between the sticks. I think Vicario will be very popular, and I talked about him in a transfer video recently. I talked about skipping him, and the fixtures are ultimately there for Tottenham to keep clean sheets, but I felt that in fixtures like West Ham, for example, they could concede. Ultimately, that wasn't the case. Maybe the red card played a big part in that, but ultimately they have improved defensively under Thomas Frank. Gabriel is still 6.1 million, and I could see him rising to 6.2 in a couple of weeks' time when Arsenal's fixtures turn for the better in Game Week 7. Lacroix is currently at 5 million, and that's another one who could rise in price after that Liverpool game in Game Week 6. Then you got Ezri Konsa at 4.5. I don't really see that changing. If anything, he'd be closer to a drop than a price rise, and Pedro Porro is at 5.6. Mohamed Salah is quite stable at 14.5, and Cody Gakpo and Reinders went up by 0.2 million since the start of the season, and Ndiaye is a bit underrated at 6.5, whilst everyone focuses on Jack Grealish. And to be fair, he had another great game against Aston Villa after winning the Premier League Player of the Month award. Joao Pedro went up in price overnight, so on the Tuesday, the 16th of September, to 7.8 million, and Ollie Watkins went down a couple of days ago to 8.8 million. Dubravka and Reynildo are currently at 4, and Ismaila Sarr is still at 6.5, but that will change very soon. And Chris Wood actually suffered a price decrease over the last couple of days to 7.6 million, but I still think he's worth holding for the next 2 fixtures, and selling him could be a big mistake, especially against Burnley. So my confirmed transfer is selling Ismaila Sarr to Antoine Semenyo, who is the best midfielder in FPL so far this season. He cost 7.5 million, has a decent record against Newcastle, and I think Bournemouth have the advantage. Not playing in Europe, of course, they've got the extra rest, whilst Newcastle face Barcelona on Thursday. So even if the Toon get a famous victory or result, I still think there'll be a come down facing Bournemouth, and the Cherries could take advantage, and the likes of Semenyo could produce yet another return. And even if he blanks in this fixture, and trust me, I had a lot of frustrations with Antoine Semenyo last season, I still think long term he'll be one of the best picks in the midfield, especially at his price point. He went up to 7.5 million, but I made this transfer before he rose in price, I think on Saturday night going into Sunday. So after that Bournemouth game was completed, I made the transfer because, as I talked about in my deadline stream, one of the main reasons why I bought Lacroix for Murillo was to give me enough money to make this specific transfer, and ultimately this was my plan all along. You could definitely say, why not sell Ollie Watkins instead and focus on him because he has been absolutely terrible, but Aston Villa still have the fixtures and Harvey Elliott could make a massive difference. He scored his first goal for Aston Villa in the Carabao Cup in that defeat against Brentford on penalties, but ultimately I think Semenyo was the priority to bolster this midfield, and I've got the likes of Rangers away to Arsenal and Ndai facing Liverpool away, so I needed an extra solid midfielder, especially for Game Week 5, and I think Antoine Semenyo provides that in abundance, and I think in many Game Weeks to come, he's going to be a great option for the captaincy and in my squad. Now, a possible transfer I could make as soon as Game Week 6 is Mohamed Salah to Moises Caicedo. He's not the only midfielder I'm looking at, but at 5.6 million, he offers outstanding value. He went up in price for a reason over the last couple of days with goals against West Ham and Brentford away from home. They were terrific strikes, and also he's getting defensive contribution points in virtually every single game except that 5-1 victory against West Ham back in Game Week 2. And I think over the course of a 38-game season, assuming he starts all of them, which he probably won't, he's going to get defensive contribution points in over 30. That's the way he's going at this moment in time, and that gives me enough money to make a huge upgrade in the forward line. But the other midfielder I'm looking at is Xavi Simons, who was quite disappointing in UCL Fantasy against Villarreal. He was booked in that game but got 3 points overall, and in FPL he got an assist on his debut from a set piece, and I think Spurs have improved massively from those situations under Thomas Frank, and they look much more solid defensively. So if you compare them from last season to now, I think they're a completely different team in terms of play style, their resilience, and ultimately they might have built upon that Europa League win where sometimes they were a bit more conservative, especially in the final against Man United, even under Ange Postecoglou. So I think the foundation is there for Tottenham to improve and have a much better league campaign. They could easily finish in the top 5 this season and qualify for the Champions League next season via the league, which is something they never could have done in the previous campaign when they finished 17th. They're not going to do so this time round. It's safe to say they've had a great start to the season, and I think Xavi Simons could be a decent acquisition for my FPL team. But Erling Haaland is not a decent acquisition. He is one of the best assets in the game, if not the best, especially from Game Week 6. But as I said in my reaction stream over the weekend, my advice is not to take a -4 hit or sell Salah to Haaland this week. I will not be doing that. The best time on paper is Game Week 6. Is football played on paper? I'm well aware that it isn't, but Haaland facing Arsenal away compared to Salah at home to Everton, I'd rather captain Salah and keep him for this week and then move to Erling Haaland in Game Week 6. That is my current plan. It would be for a -4 hit since I bought Antoine Semenyo this week, so I'd only have one free transfer in Game Week 6, but moving from Salah to Moises Caicedo or Xavi Simons and then Watkins to Erling Haaland for a -4 hit and triple captaining Haaland against Burnley at home, I think that's a real possibility for my FPL squad. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below. But it's now time to discuss my starting 11 and my ultimate 50-man squad for Game Week 5. At least that's going to be my aim. It's going to be quite difficult to match the best free hit and wildcard squads with what I've got right now. But Robert Sanchez is away to Man United, and I've got a decision to make. Will I start him or Martin Dubravka at home to Forest? And that is something I could change during the deadline stream. But in most game weeks, I'm going to opt for Robert Sanchez and Chelsea defensively, but they haven't kept a clean sheet so far this season in away matches. But at home, they have looked like a different beast. Maybe a bit lucky not to concede against Fulham, to be fair, but ultimately Chelsea are much stronger defensively this season, and they are improving under Enzo Maresca. In my defensive line, despite the success of a back four last week, I could go for a defensive line which only comprises of 3 players in Pedro Porro, Lacroix, and Konsa. All of them are away from home, and I've got the likes of Ranildo Mandava, who faces Aston Villa at home, and Gabriel Magalhaes facing Manchester City also at home. So maybe introducing one of those players, maybe even 2 of them, could work very well, and it bolsters my chances of a clean sheet. But what puts me off Gabriel against Man City is I think the citizens will score in that game, even if Arsenal end up winning it. And I think his ceiling won't be as high as Lacroix, who I think is due a goal. I've been saying this since last season. His XG was so high and he didn't score enough goals. He is probably the main threat from set pieces for Crystal Palace, and West Ham are really struggling from those situations. And Pedro Porro also has that constant high ceiling, but he hasn't really shown it so far this season. He got 8 points in UCL Fantasy because of ball recoveries, and occasionally in FPL, he will score DEFCON, which is a similar system to what I just talked about from the Champions League. But I think Porro still has that set-piece threat. That could be shared with Xavi Simons, of course, and that would deteriorate his abilities and also appeal as an FPL asset. But I still think he's worth 5.6 million with Tottenham Hotspur's upcoming fixtures. I don't think they'll keep a clean sheet, though, against Brighton. So with Porro, the hope is he gets a goal or assist. And if I want to bolster my clean sheet chances, I think Gabriel or Renilo Mandava might be better choices. And Ezri Konsa is facing a very decent Sunderland side at this moment in time, but I still think Aston Villa could get a win here and also keep a clean sheet in the process. So that's why Konsa is in here. But his ceiling is generally the lowest of any of my defenders alongside Renilo Mandava. Then it comes down to who you prefer between Sunderland and Aston Villa. Based on current form, you'd go for the home side and the Black Cats, but I still think Aston Villa have levels to go to, and once it clicks, they'll be rising up the Premier League table, scoring more goals, and also keeping a few clean sheets in the process. And for all their faults this season, they have looked decent defensively up until now. Going into the midfield, though, I'm starting Salah, Gakpo, Semenyo, and Ndai. So that's 3 players from the Merseyside derby at this moment in time, and I was even considering benching Ndai for a Gabriel or a Nilo Mandava this week. But I think Semenyo was really needed in this position because I think Salah and Gakpo are absolutely fine. They're actually captaincy contenders against Everton at home, but the rest look quite bleak, to be quite honest with you. Ismail Assar being injured, he would have been quite promising against West Ham away. You've got Ndai and Rangers with difficult away games against 2 of the best teams in the country. And don't get me wrong, those players could still return big time because they are quality players and they have shown promise in a lot of games this season. But Semenyo, I think, is on another level right now, and facing a Newcastle side that won't have as big of a break as Bournemouth, I think the Cherries can capitalise on that, and stylistically they will cause them a lot of problems anyway. So Semenyo is a great option in the long term, and he's also a captaincy contender for Gameweek 5 as well, but ultimately it's going to be between Salah and Gakpo when it comes to the armband. Up front, I've got Joao Pedro, Chris Wood, and Ollie Watkins, and if the last 2 were showing a lot of form, I think there would be genuine considerations for the armband this week. But I think Chris Wood would still be ranked quite highly. He did score 2 goals in Gameweek 1 against Brentford, and the last time he played Burnley, he scored a brace. So I think Chris Wood would still be right up there. But the fact that Ollie Watkins hasn't scored a single goal this season, and Aston Villa in the Premier League are the only side in England's top 7 divisions to not have scored a single goal, I'm sorry, but that's going to put me off from captaining Ollie Watkins. Could he still feature in a top 10 list? Absolutely, because of the fixture on paper, but I still think he pales in comparison to Joao Pedro, who has a good record against Man United, Cole Palmer, who's now back from injury, and in my setup, Antoine Semenyo, Gakpo, Salah, and Chris Wood would all be ranked higher than Ollie Watkins. On my bench, I've got Dubravka, Reinders, Renilo Mandava, and Gabriel. My biggest concern would be placing Gabriel so far away from my starting 11 as Arsenal look imperious defensively. They've conceded 1 goal this season, and that was from an amazing free kick by Szoboszlai in what I deem to be a 0-0 draw, written all over it, decided by 1 moment of quality. So Arsenal defensively have been absolutely exceptional. I don't think they'll beat Chelsea's record of 15 goals conceded in a single campaign. That is absolutely ridiculous, but I think Arsenal are the only team in the next couple of years that could get close to breaking that sort of record. And who knows, records are there to be broken, and Gabriel will be a phenomenal FPL asset. And Arsenal's squad depth is ridiculous, by the way. They rested Declan Rice against Nottingham Forest. Odegaard picked up an injury in the first couple of minutes. Saliba missed out as he wasn't feeling 100%. He should be available for Gameweek 5. And Bukayo Saka is a massive miss, especially in terms of creativity. And yet Arsenal won 3-0, and they also got the job done against Athletic Bilbao. But Gabriel is someone I could change, not just a second on my bench, but he might even make it into my starting 11, and I might just focus on the Liverpool win, and my prediction right now is a 2-0 victory for the Reds, and that's where I could shift a few things and go to a back 4 once more and start 3 midfielders in what probably would be the first time in many years in Fantasy Premier League. Before the captaincy, Mohamed Salah is someone I've captained so many times over the last couple of seasons, and I don't see myself going away from him in Gameweek 5, but that downgrade to Caicedo or Xavi Simons, maybe even a Bruno Fernandes, could work very well, and that gives me enough money to buy Erling Haaland for Ollie Watkins, but that would be for Gameweek 6. I've already made my transfer. I don't think it's worth a -8 hit in my situation to go for Erling Haaland now, even though he can score against Arsenal. I just think Salah is the best captaincy option for Game Week 5, but there'll be a massive shift towards Erling Haaland in the upcoming game week when Man City host Burnley at home, and Haaland's record against the Clarets is incredible, and that will be the best triple captaincy opportunity so far this season. When it comes to expected points, these are taken by Fantasy Football Hub, and Robert Sanchez has a decent number. It's always quite consistent, but if you actually look at it, Dubravka has a higher number here. So Sanchez is at 3.5 and Dubravka has 3.6. Pedro Porro is quite low at 3.5 for a premium defender, and Lacroix is slightly higher at 3.9. Consa's 3.5. You also compare that to my defenders on my bench. Reinildo has 3.4, and the highest is actually Gabriel, despite facing Manchester City, with 4.3. Mohamed Salah remains top with 7.6, and he's going to be my captain in Game Week 5. Cody Gakpo has exactly 5 here, but I think that should be a little bit higher considering it's a home fixture, and the Dutchman is incredible at Anfield compared to away matches. Antoine Semenyo is also at a decent figure at 5.9, and Ndiaye produces 4.3 expected points, which is the exact same as Gabriel Magalhaes. Those two might be the main contenders for the starting 11, but I do have Gabriel third on my bench at this moment in time. Joao Pedro has 5.3. Chris Wood is at 4.9, which seems a little bit low. I think he could repay the faith of a lot of FPL managers with a goal or two against Burnley. And Ollie Watkins remains incredibly high at 6.4. The other player to talk about is Reinders with 3.9. Who would you start between Ndiaye, Reinders, Gabriel? Would you even bench another defender like Konsa or Ollie Watkins? Let me know down the comment section below. But my advice to people with Ollie Watkins is, if you're looking to bench him this week against Sunderland away, you should sell him if possible. And I think the best way to get to Erling Haaland is to use someone like Ollie Watkins as a sacrifice. And moving Watkins to Gyökeres this week might pay off. I like him in the long term, but I still think it would be a bigger priority to get Erling Haaland and use Ollie Watkins as that sort of cash cow. But it would also require a downgrade elsewhere. And in my case, Mohamed Salah to a midfielder at around 9 million or below is the way to do it. It's not ideal. I'd rather keep Salah despite his indifferent start to the season. He's still getting goals and assists in virtually every single game. But I think from Game Week 6 onwards, Erling Haaland becomes the undisputed best asset in Fantasy Premier League. By taking a -4 here, I'd be in a great position in Game Week 6, and I would be selling the likes of Salah to a Xavi Simons, Caicedo, or maybe Bruno Fernandes, who might seem to be such an expensive holding midfielder, as some people like to call him, but he's still on penalties. He's got that high ceiling. Any goals or assists will result in bonus points, and the avenues to points is definitely there with Bruno Fernandes. And I still have 0.5 million in the bank, by the way. So Watkins to Haaland, and then Salah to Bruno Fernandes will leave me with 0.5 million in the bank. I take a -4 hit in the process, and I can triple captain the Norwegian robot at home to Burnley. In goal, I have Robert Sanchez at home to Brighton, and Porro, Konsa, and Gabriel are also looking quite solid for Game Week 6, but I think Gabriel away to Newcastle isn't maybe my favourite fixture, and Arsenal have struggled at St James's Park in recent seasons. Bruno Fernandes is away from home against Brentford. Gakpo is away to Crystal Palace. It's not the best sort of fixture for Gakpo, but he is still fixture-proof. I just prefer him at Anfield. Semenyo is facing Leeds away. That looks very promising. And Ndiaye against West Ham looks very encouraging, to say the least. Chris Wood is at home to Sunderland. Then I could look to move him on in upcoming game weeks, but there's no real pressing need to do so. I still think he can tick along nicely against the likes of Newcastle and Chelsea in future game weeks. Erling Haaland, of course, will be the best asset in Fantasy Premier League, as I discussed before. And Joao Pedro facing his former club Brighton, just like Robert Sanchez. Dubravka is on my bench as the backup goalkeeper, and I don't want to start him against Man City away. I said the same thing against Liverpool in Game Week 4, and he outscored Robert Sanchez and was so close to keeping a clean sheet. And Reinders is first on my bench with these provisional transfers of one of Caicedo, Xavi Simons, or Bruno Fernandes. To be fair though, if I were to buy a Caicedo, for example, I could see myself starting Reinders instead of him. But when it's Bruno Fernandes or someone of that sort of price tag and reputation, it's difficult to kind of make that sort of judgment call. And that's where price does influence our decision making at times. But I think Reinders would be a great option for Game Week 6, and Lacroix will always score DEFCON, or almost always, in difficult fixtures like Liverpool at home. But I think Liverpool will score in that game, and it could be quite cagey, like it was last season at Selhurst Park, where Liverpool won 1-0, and Reinildo Mandava is last on my bench facing Nottingham Forest away from home. But the priority will be the triple captaincy. I don't think the bench boost would be terrible with this sort of setup, but I think Dubravka away from home against Man City lets it down a little bit. But the triple captaincy on Haaland is a big priority for me in Game Week 6. I think that's a great opportunity, which I'll look to capitalise on in the next week. As highly as I rate Erling Haaland from Game Week 6 onwards, he is facing Arsenal away in Game Week 5, so he's only 6th in my captaincy list for the upcoming deadline. If you disagree, of course, let's continue that conversation in the comments section and also in the deadline stream on Saturday. I've got Mohamed Salah in top spot once more, but that could definitely change from Game Week 6 onwards, and he might struggle to enter the podium at times, but especially for that number 1 spot over Erling Haaland. Chris Wood is second, facing Burnley away, his former club. Antoine Semenyo is third with a decent record against Newcastle. Ekitike is fourth, but Alexander Isak will eat into those minutes in the future. Cole Palmer is fifth, facing Manchester United away. Haaland, Gakpo, João Pedro, Mateta, and Ollie Watkins complete the top 10. And I was seriously considering Gyökeres over Ollie Watkins in this top 10 list. And Gyökeres obviously scored a hat-trick against Man City last season for Sporting in the Champions League, and I think Gyökeres could be crucial in such a fixture as well. His home record for Arsenal has been brilliant so far, with 3 goals across 2 matches. So there are plenty of options where that came from, but I think the captaincy is quite difficult this week. Apart from Salah, there aren't too many standouts, and the likes of Chris Wood and Watkins, with appealing fixtures on paper, haven't really had the form in recent matches, and Aston Villa have been poor so far this season. But there will be more graphics where that came from in future videos, like the best wildcard team, where I'll talk about clean sheet odds to give you the full picture. And the same goes for that deadline stream on Saturday. Be sure not to miss it by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and clicking that notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, both FPL and UCL fantasy across the season. You'll be in a great position to win your mini leagues and rise up the rankings by watching my content. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, for the key updates you need for both fantasy formats. The same goes for my Discord server, the FPL League, Spotify, and also check out my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks like priority reply to comments that could be very useful in hectic deadline streams like the one we got on Tuesday for the Champions League. I'll see you on Saturday for that next deadline stream, and there could also be a reaction stream over the weekend. And on top of that, there'll be more content for Game Week 5, 6, and the rest of the season. The same goes for UCL Fantasy as we approach Match Day 2.